Welcome back to our deep dive into the Charente Estuary. And before we left off, we were talking about the challenges of getting people on board with this radical idea
Yeah.
of a landscape laboratory that embraces flooding.
It's understandable that people might be hesitant.
Yeah.
After all, we're so conditioned to see floods as disasters,
Yeah.
something to be feared and avoided. But what if we could change that perception? What if we could show people that floods can also be opportunities for renewal and connection with nature?
That's a big what if.
It is?
But how do you actually do that?
Right.
How do you convince people to embrace something they've been taught to fear?
That's where the design of the landscape laboratory comes in.
Okay.
Remember those reimagined levees we talked about?
Yeah.
They're not just flood defenses. They're
Yeah.
also elevated walkways that would allow people to experience the floodscape firsthand.
Right.
Imagine yourself walking along these paths, watching as the water rises and recedes, observing how the landscape transforms before your eyes.
Okay. I can see how that could be a powerful experience. But wouldn't that make people want to be near a flood zone? Isn't that counterintuitive?
That's a fair point, but think about it this way. By allowing people to safely experience flooding, you're taking away some of the fear and mystery surrounding it.
Okay.
You're helping them to understand that flooding is a natural process
Right.
and that it doesn't have to be destructive.
So it's about education as much as it is about design.
Absolutely. The essay emphasizes the pedagogical aspect of this project.
Okay.
It envisions the landscape laboratory as a place where people can learn about the ecology of the estuary,
Right.
the history of human interaction with water, and the challenges and opportunities of adapting to a changing climate.
So it's like turning the entire estuary into a living classroom.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the learning wouldn't be confined to a traditional classroom setting.
Right.
It would happen through direct experience, through observation, and through interaction with the landscape itself.
Now, you mentioned earlier that the design of the laboratory draws inspiration from both French garden art and Nordic landscape architecture.
Yes.
How do those seemingly different styles come together in this project?
It's a fascinating blend of the formal and the informal.
Okay.
From French garden art, they've borrowed the idea of creating vistas.
Vistas.
Those long, carefully composed views that draw the eye across the landscape.
Okay.
So even though it's a floodscape, it's still a design landscape with a sense of order and intentionality.
So there's a beauty to it, even in the midst of the chaos of flooding.
Exactly.
Wow.
But at the same time, they're drawing on Nordic landscape architecture, which tends to embrace a more naturalistic approach,
Mm-hmm.
working with the existing topography and vegetation to create a sense of harmony with the surroundings.
So it's a landscape that's both structured and wild-controlled and unpredictable.
Precisely. And remember, some areas within the laboratory would be left to evolve spontaneously without human intervention.
Right. The third landscape.
Exactly. These areas would become what the essay calls a third landscape, a space for unexpected beauty and biodiversity to emerge.
You know, this idea of a third landscape really resonates with me. It's like acknowledging that sometimes the best thing we can do is step back and let nature do its thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm curious about the practicalities of all of this.
Okay.
How would this laboratory actually function? Would it be open to the public?
Absolutely. The essay envisions a space that's open and accessible to everyone, scientists, landscape architects, local communities, and visitors alike.
Wow.
It would be a place for research, education, recreation, and community building all in one.
So it's not just a research facility.
Yeah.
It's a public park as well.
You could think of it that way.
Okay.
But it's a park with a purpose.
Hmm.
It's a place where people can come together to learn about the estuary, to connect with nature, and to be part of a larger conversation about how we adapt to a changing world.
I can see how that would be really powerful, especially for the people who live in the area.
Exactly. The essay argues that by involving local communities in the design and management of the laboratory,
Yeah.
you create a sense of ownership and stewardship,
Okay.
ensuring that the project is truly rooted in the local context.
So it's not just about designing for people. It's about designing with people.
Precisely. And it's about recognizing that local communities have a wealth of knowledge and experience that can inform the design process.
Okay.
They understand the rhythms of the estuary, the challenges of living with water, and the cultural significance of this landscape.
I love that. It's about empowering people to become active participants in shaping their environment rather than just passive observers.
Exactly. And the educational potential is huge. Imagine school children visiting the laboratory, learning about the ecology of the estuary, witnessing the effects of climate change firsthand, and perhaps even participating in some of the research projects.
It's one thing to read about climate change in a textbook,
Right.
But it's quite another to see it happening right before your eyes.
Absolutely. And the essay suggests that this kind of experiential learning could lead to a deeper understanding of the challenges we face and a greater willingness to engage in finding solutions.
Okay, so far we've talked a lot about the potential benefits of this landscape laboratory.
Right.
But I imagine there are also challenges and risks involved in such a radical approach.
Of course.
What are some of those?
Well, any project of this scale is going to face challenges. For one thing, there's the uncertainty of climate change itself.
right.
We can make projections about sea level rise and storm surges, but the future is always unpredictable.
So the landscape laboratory would have to be adaptable, able to evolve
Yeah.
as conditions change.
Exactly. And that raises questions about long-term maintenance and management.
Mm.
Who will be responsible for ensuring that the laboratory continues to function as intended, even as the landscape around it transforms?
And what about the cultural heritage of the region?
Yes.
We talked earlier about the importance of those levees as symbols of human ingenuity and resilience.
Yeah.
Wouldn't reshaping those levees, even for a good cause, be seen as erasing a part of local history?
That's a valid concern, and it's one that the essay acknowledges.
Okay.
It argues that any design intervention in a landscape as culturally rich as the Charente Estuary must be sensitive to its history and heritage.
So it's not just about designing for the future, it's about honoring the past as well.
Precisely. It's about finding ways to integrate the new with the old, to create a landscape that reflects the continuity of human presence in this region, while also embracing the need for adaptation and change.
I'm also wondering about the potential for conflict.
Okay.
We talked earlier about the cognitive dissonance created by those levees.
Right.
People have come to rely on them for protection. Wouldn't reshaping them and allowing for controlled flooding raise concerns about safety and property damage?
That's a very real challenge. And it highlights the importance of community engagement and education.
Mm.
If this landscape laboratory is going to succeed, it needs to be a collaborative effort with local communities involved every step of the way.
So it's not just about building a physical space, it's about building trust and understanding.
Absolutely. And it's about communicating the potential benefits of this approach, not just in terms of flood mitigation, but also in terms of ecological restoration, recreation, and economic development.
Mm. This is really fascinating. I'm starting to see how this landscape laboratory could be a catalyst for change, not just in the physical landscape, but also in the way people think about their relationship with water.
Yes.
But before we get too ahead of ourselves, let's take a step back and consider some broader implications of this project.
Okay.
What can we learn from the Charente Estuary that might apply to other places facing similar challenges?
That's a great question. The Charente Estuary offers valuable insights into how we can approach adaptation in a way that's both innovative and sensitive to local contexts.
So what makes the Charente Estuary so special? What can we learn from this particular place?
Well, for one thing, it's a place with a long and complex history of human interaction with water.
Okay.
The landscape itself bears the traces of centuries of effort to control and manage water, as well as the consequences of those efforts.
So it's a place where we can see both the successes and the failures of our past attempts to control nature.
Exactly. And that's valuable knowledge. It helps us to understand that there's no one-size-fits-all solution to the challenges of climate change. Each place has its own unique history, its own unique ecology, and its own unique set of cultural values that need to be considered in the design process.
So the Charente Estuary is like a case study in how to approach adaptation in a way that's both site-specific and globally relevant.
That's a great way to put it.
Wow.
And the lessons learned from this project could inform adaptation strategies in coastal regions all over the world.
I'm also struck by the emphasis on community engagement in this project.
Yes.
It seems like that's a key ingredient for success, no matter where you are.
Absolutely. The essay argues that successful adaptation requires more than just technical solutions. It requires a shift in mindset, a willingness to embrace change, and a commitment to working together to create a more resilient future.
Right.
And that's something that can only happen through meaningful community engagement.
So it's about building relationships as much as it is about building seawalls.